What if a single speech could change the direction of a nation before it was ever heard? What if that speech was given and then erased? In the early 2000s, long before global spotlights followed his every move, Xi Jinping stood before a room of silent elites and spoke. No cameras, no transcripts, just memory and fear. Some say the words he spoke were too radical. Others claim they were too prophetic. But what if those words were never truly lost? This is the story of a voice that was never recorded, but refused to be forgotten. In the winter of 2003, behind the stone walls of Beijing's inner sanctum, a speech was planned, one that would never be broadcast, never be quoted, and according to official records, never delivered. It was a time when China was shifting. The world saw rapid digital growth, and the party understood that whoever controlled data would soon control history itself. Within a discreet wing of Zongnanhai, a meeting was organized, not for the masses, not even for the public, but for select members of the ideological elite. Generals, internal propaganda architects, tech theorists, those who shaped the state's mental terrain. And then came Xi Jinping. He wasn't president yet. He wasn't even the most famous name in the room. But he had an idea, something dangerous, something so far ahead of its time, it scared the very people it sought to empower. He took the podium not with a speech, but a vision. I speak today, he began, not as a politician, but as a memory in progress. The room, thick with cigarette smoke and decorated in crimson velvet, fell into a deeper silence. He spoke of 3 ideas. 1. Strategic erasure, not just censorship, but algorithmic forgetting. Make the memory vanish not with fire, but with code, he said. 2. Algorithmic mythology, the creation of truth not through facts, but through pattern. A future where machines sculpt belief systems, where AI preserves only what serves the state. 3. Recursive patriotism, a looped sense of national identity. Patriotism, he said, should not be taught. It should be experienced endlessly through feedback, through repetition, through reinforcement. As he spoke, the stenographer in the back of the room, a woman who had recorded hundreds of speeches in her lifetime, felt an odd chill. It wasn't what he was saying, it was how he was saying it, like someone documenting a prophecy. And then the lights flickered. Within moments, a quiet order rippled through the room. Phones were removed. The paper was to be burned. No transcripts. No recordings. The speech was cancelled. Silenced. Deleted. Officially, it never happened. But one thing remained, the memory of the woman who wrote it down. And the decision by a small circle of party members that what she said that day was too dangerous to ignore, and too dangerous to preserve. It was the briefing that would become a myth. The forbidden myth. Her name was Zhao Meiyun. Nobody outside the inner circle remembered her, and even those who once worked beside her barely spoke her name aloud. But she remembered everything. She had spent 30 years working as a stenographer inside the State Council's transcription unit. She had typed out countless speeches, briefings, and dry policy monologues. But nothing stayed with her like that night in 2003. She didn't speak during the meeting. She didn't ask questions. She just listened, fingers dancing quietly over the keyboard, recording every word that Xi Jinping had said, every line of strategic erasure, every phrase about recursive identity. And when the order came to burn the documents, she hesitated. That night, Zhao went home with something she wasn't supposed to have, her own annotated version of the lost speech. Handwritten, folded, hidden inside the lining of her coat. She told herself it was nothing, just curiosity. But something about those ideas haunted her. In the years that followed, Zhao retired quietly. She moved to a modest apartment in Shenyang, far from the noise of Beijing. There, among stacks of old books and fading calligraphy brushes, she began to write. At first it was innocent poetry, verses inspired by the river outside her window. Short haikus, traditional forms. But the content was different. Her poems had strange lines. Echoes shaped the architecture of truth. History bends to those who hear in code. Erase, not to forget, but to refocus. It wasn't long before one of her neighbors, a literature professor, began to suspect that Zhao's poems weren't poems at all, but fragments of something deeper. When questioned, Zhao would smile. "They're just memories," she'd say, "of a voice that never existed." But privately, she knew what she was doing. She was encoding the speech, line by line, wrapped in metaphor, disguised as art. Years passed. Zhao avoided the internet. She avoided phones. But sometimes she'd mail her poems, always handwritten, to a friend in Guangzhou who ran a small printing press. One day, a poem arrived titled, "The Algorithm Wakes in Red." And then another, "I Dream in Loops of Loyalty." Those who read her poems began to feel they were reading something more than verse. Something lost. Something powerful. And then, Zhao disappeared. No trace. No final message. Just a small wooden desk with dozens of notebooks, and a single sentence written on the final page. Asterisk, memory is only dangerous when it refuses to die. The year was 2021. In a forgotten wing of the Ministry of Information, a low-priority AI program named Wuji-17 sat buried in legacy servers. It had been designed in the late 2000s to assist with linguistic pattern recognition and archiving, but newer systems had long overtaken it. Now it mostly monitored older, analog datasets, rarely updated, rarely queried. But Wuji-17 had one peculiar habit. It never stopped running background comparisons. It cross-referenced thousands of speech transcripts, policy memos, and propaganda materials, looking for anomalies, contradictions, or shifts in ideological tone. It had been trained to recognize discontinuities. And one day, it found one. A fragment. A sentence. Loyalty is recursive when memory is decentralized. No attribution. No metadata. No reference. It didn't exist in any known speech or briefing. But it matched an older internal pattern, a writing style embedded in early 2000 structures. The AI flagged it, isolated it, then continued finding more. Over the span of 36 hours, Wuji-17 generated 217 unique fragments, sentences, phrases, metaphors that bore no known source but matched the linguistic fingerprint of one individual, Xi Jinping. An analyst named Hao Shen noticed the anomaly. Curious, he extracted the batch and started reading. To govern perception, you must first erase the alternatives. Truth repeated enough becomes origin. Let the machine remember so we don't have to. They read like philosophy, or maybe prophecy. Shen ran deeper scans. He found encrypted echoes of the same style buried in formatting notes, forgotten protocol drafts, and metadata strings dating back to the early 2000s. It was as if a ghost had haunted the system, an algorithmic afterimage of something once spoken, then deleted. But machines, unlike humans, don't forget. They just misfile. Howe didn't report the fragments. He fed them into a generative model and watched as the AI reconstructed a partial transcript, coherent, terrifying, elegant. It began, asterisk, "This is not a speech. This is a backup memory of power." Asterisk. Howe saved the file. He renamed it echo.docs and hid it in a private directory. He never spoke of it again. But the system kept generating. And somewhere deep in China's labyrinthine network of archival code, the forgotten speech kept rewriting itself, in silence, in pattern, in digital memory. In 2023, an obscure online bookstore in Chengdu listed a self-published poetry collection called The Listener. It had no listed author, no publisher, just a black cover, and inside, 88 pages of strange, hypnotic verse. At first, it went unnoticed. The writing was dense, full of symbolism. Some called it neo-propaganda, others just gibberish. But then someone on a literature forum pointed out a repeating theme. Memory. Line after line, the poems circled around remembrance, repetition, and silence. I listened to what was never said. History forgot me, so I wrote it again. The voice that wasn't heard rewrote us. A user named @Panopticon Scholar uploaded a post comparing the poetry style to an old set of government AI-generated text fragments. He called it the erased lexicon. Others began comparing it too, and something clicked. The poems didn't just echo the tone of the lost speech. They were it, reconstructed, reworded, made abstract, but unmistakable in message. And then it got weird. One of the poems directly referenced strategic erasure, a phrase not used publicly since 2003. Another referenced a recursive flag, a symbol mentioned only in internal documents. The kicker, page 42, featured a poem with a mirrored acrostic. The first letter of every line spelled Jinping. Now people were talking. Digital scans of the book spread on encrypted forums. Telegram groups started decoding patterns in the layout, ink pressure, even line spacing. Some believed the text was a cipher, others thought it was an AI test. Some called it prophecy. Others called it treason. The Chinese literary underground dubbed it the Silent Manifesto. And it wasn't long before foreign intelligence analysts took notice. A leaked NSA memo described the book as a high-risk ideological artifact masquerading as art. Within weeks, The Listener disappeared from every known marketplace. Web crawlers removed PDF links. Even book review videos were taken down. But the text had already seeded itself in the minds of thousands. Copies were translated, re-encoded, hidden in blockchain archives. A revolution doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with metaphors. And somewhere, the person who wrote The Listener, or perhaps reconstructed it, was still out there. Watching, writing, whispering a speech that had never been recorded, but could no longer be forgotten. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday when it happened. Across several provinces in China, television sets running the state's news channel CCTV suddenly went black. Not all at once, but in a ripple, like a wave. Just static, followed by a high-pitched frequency, then silence. For exactly 17 seconds, the broadcast glitched. What came next wasn't a message. It wasn't even a full sentence. It was a voice. Male. Come. Deliberate. Familiar. This is not the memory they erased, it said. This is the silence they built. Then, nothing. Screens returned to normal. Anchors continued as if nothing had happened. But people noticed. Clips surfaced online. First on obscure forums. Then WeChat. Then Reddit. Voice analysts from Taiwan, the US, and South Korea tried to pin it down. Some said it was manipulated audio. Others ran voice print analysis and came back with an uncomfortable possibility. 94% matched to Xi Jinping's known recordings. Within hours, the clip was removed. Accounts banned. Threads wiped. But the mystery couldn't be erased. That 17-second moment became known as the ghost broadcast. Digital forensics experts noticed something else. Embedded in the audio file were low-frequency tones that matched early 2000s military data patterns. Buried in the sound, 5 Mandarin characters. Translated, they read, "Echo survives the purge." Meanwhile, a group of signal hackers in Hong Kong replicated the glitch. They discovered that the original clip was broadcast from an unused frequency registered in 2003. Tied to a military communications relay. And someone had accessed it. The theory, the original speech, or parts of it, had been encoded into sound. Not stored as text or video, but as modulated signal artifacts, buried in broadcast systems, waiting. Waiting for what? No one knows. What followed was even stranger. People across the country began reporting dreams. Shared themes. A shadow in a red-lit room. A voice speaking in loops. A phrase they couldn't forget. You cannot delete an idea once it remembers itself. Some claimed to hear the voice in phone static. Others saw phrases flash on malfunctioning screens. State media remained silent. But something had changed. The speech wasn't just a lost memory anymore. It was an infection. A ghost idea, haunting networks, minds, systems. And somewhere, in the fabric of state-controlled silence, a new kind of broadcast had begun. One without senders. One without receivers. Just echoes. Endless, recursive echoes. What if some stories were never meant to disappear, but were simply waiting to be remembered? If this voice, the one that was never recorded, made you question what lies beneath the silence, then maybe you're ready to hear more. Don't forget to subscribe for deeper stories they'd rather we forget. And tell us in the comments. Do you believe the speech ever really happened? This was Alternative Xi, where erased ideas find their echo.